The moment Ruth Caldwell stepped off that Wyoming train with only $1.47 to her name, a bum leg that ached with every step, and a dress that had once been fine, but now looked as faded as her hope, she made herself a promise. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of strangers who already looked at her like she was something broken that needed throwing away. The November wind cut across the Laramie Station platform with the kind of cold that got inside your bones and settled there. It carried the smell of coal smoke and distant snow sharp enough to make her eyes water. That's what she told herself anyway. That it was the wind making her eyes sting, not fear, not the weight of everything she'd lost pressing down on her chest until breathing felt like work. She stood on that wooden platform, one hand gripping the handle of her carpet bag so tight her knuckles went white, the other wrapped around the cane that kept her upright when her injured leg threatened to give out. Behind her, the conductor and porter wrestled her trunk down from the baggage car. It wasn't heavy. Everything she owned in the world fit in that one battered trunk, and most of it was air and regret. Ruth's eyes scanned the platform. November afternoon sun slanted low through the mountains to the west, turning everything gold and shadow. A handful of people moved about their business. A drummer with his sample cases. An elderly couple greeting a younger woman, probably their daughter. Two cowboys heading toward the livery stable, spurs jingling with each step. Normal people doing normal things in a normal town. She was looking for one person specifically, Vernon Shaw. The man who'd sent her that letter 3 months ago. The man who'd promised her a new start, a home, a place where the past didn't matter. The man who was supposed to be her husband by week's end. A young conductor approached, tipping his cap with practiced courtesy. "Ma'am, your husband meeting you." Ruth kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes, Mr. Vernon Shaw. He should be here." The conductor nodded and moved on. Ruth shifted her weight, trying to ease the constant ache that ran from her right knee down to her ankle. The accident that had given her this limp had happened 18 months ago, but some mornings it felt like yesterday. Some mornings she woke up and forgot, started to stand like she used to, full weight on both legs, confident and strong. Then the pain would hit and she'd remember everything that had been taken, everything she'd lost. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The platform began to empty. The elderly couple left with their daughter. The cowboys disappeared into the livery. The drummer caught a wagon heading east. Ruth stood in the growing shadows trunk beside her, refusing to sit despite the fire shooting up her leg. She'd learned something in Boston in those terrible months after James left and the church turned against her. The moment you sit down, the moment you show weakness, people stop seeing you as human. They start seeing you as burden, as problem to be solved or disposed of. So Ruth stood back straight, chin up, even though every nerve in her leg screamed for relief. 15 minutes became 20, then 25. The station master came out twice, giving her long looks that were equal parts curiosity and concern. The second time he paused by the door. "Ma'am, you need help with something?" "I'm waiting for someone, thank you." He hesitated like he wanted to say more, then nodded and went back inside. Through the window she could see him watching, probably wondering what kind of woman stands alone on a train platform for half an hour with winter coming on and nowhere to go. The kind who has no other choice, Ruth thought. The kind who spent her last money on a train ticket west because east held nothing but shame and closed doors. The kind who answered an advertisement in a newspaper because mail-order bride sounded better than charity ward, or worse. 30 minutes. The sun sank lower. Shadows lengthened. Cold deepened. Ruth's leg throbbed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Her breath came out in small white clouds. She could feel eyes on her from the general store across the street from the saloon, 2 buildings down from the boarding house at the end of the block. Small town. Stranger in worn clothes, standing alone. Of course they were watching. Then she saw him. A man coming down the main street, walking with the kind of stride that said he owned the ground under his feet. 50s, she guessed. Broad-shouldered, weathered face. Good clothes. He matched the description from the letters. Vernon Shaw, rancher, widower, looking for capable wife to help run household. Ruth's hand tightened on her cane. This was it. The moment everything either worked out or fell apart completely. She straightened her spine, another impossible inch, lifted her chin, and waited. Vernon Shaw's eyes found her, looked her up and down. His stride didn't slow, but something in his face changed, hardened. By the time he reached the platform steps, Ruth could already feel the rejection coming, could see it in the way his mouth turned down, in the way his gaze lingered on her cane. "You're Ruth Caldwell." Not a question, a statement. Flat. "Yes, Mr. Shaw. I received your letter dated September 15th, and I've come as we discussed." She kept her voice level, professional. Like this was a business arrangement, which it was. Like her heart wasn't trying to beat its way out of her chest. Like she had anywhere else to go if he turned her away. Vernon Shaw crossed his arms. "Letter said you were healthy, capable of ranch work, didn't mention you're crippled." The word hit like a slap. Ruth had heard it before, of course. In Boston, after the accident. Whispered behind hands. Said to her face by the church board when they explained why she could no longer fulfill her duties as minister's wife. Even though James was gone. Even though he was the one who'd abandoned her, stolen from the church, run off with a girl barely 20 years old. Somehow Ruth's injury had become her fault. Her failure. Her inadequacy. She forced herself to meet Vernon's eyes. "I can walk. I can work. The injury doesn't prevent me from performing household duties. I can cook, clean, sew, manage accounts, everything we discussed in our correspondence. Can you chase down chickens, carry water buckets, stand for hours doing wash?" His voice had an edge now, impatient, like she'd somehow tricked him. "I need a wife who can handle ranch life, Mrs. Caldwell, not a burden who needs looking after." Something inside Ruth wanted to fight back. Wanted to tell him that she'd survived a husband who betrayed her, a church that abandoned her, an accident that nearly killed her, and a cross-country journey that had taken the last of her strength. That she was tougher than she looked. That capable didn't mean perfect, and healthy didn't mean unmarked. But she'd learned that lesson too. Fighting back didn't change minds. It just made people dig in deeper. "I understand, Mr. Shaw. Perhaps if you gave me a chance to demonstrate my capabilities." He was already pulling something from his pocket. A small leather wallet. He counted out $5, held it out to her. "Train back east leaves Thursday morning. That should cover your ticket and meals till then. Rosa's boarding house is at the end of the street. Tell her I sent you. She'll give you a room for 2 nights. Ruth looked at the money. $5. Charity. Pity payment. Blood money for wasted time and crushed hope. Every fiber of her being wanted to refuse, wanted to throw it back in his face and tell him to keep his condescension. But pride didn't pay for food, pride didn't buy train tickets, and Thursday was 3 days away. 3 days in a strange town with $1.47 in her pocket. She took the money, hated herself for it, but she took it. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Shaw, but I thank you for the consideration." He nodded, already turning away. "Nothing personal, you understand, just practical matters." Then he was gone, walking back down the street with that same confident stride, not looking back, leaving Ruth standing on the platform with $5 and a trunk and absolutely nowhere to go. The platform wasn't empty anymore. During the conversation, people had drifted closer, not obviously, just happening to pass by, happening to stop and chat near enough to hear. Small towns didn't need newspapers when they had witnesses. Ruth recognized the type immediately. The woman in expensive blue silk 50s iron-gray hair under a fashionable hat. The younger woman beside her, pretty in a practiced way, all blonde curls and calculated sweetness. They stood perhaps 20 feet away, pretending to examine a posted notice, but their eyes were on Ruth, assessing, judging, finding her wanting. The older woman said something to the younger. Both looked at Ruth. The older woman's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile if smiles contained that much satisfaction. Then they walked away, heads together, already spreading the story. Crippled woman came on the train. Shaw took one look and sent her packing. Can you imagine trying to trap a decent man when she can barely walk? Ruth could hear it already. Could see it in the way other people on the street glanced at her and looked away. New scandal for supper conversation. entertainment for those whose lives were dull enough that other people's misfortunes felt like treats. She stood there trembling, willing herself not to sit down, not to show more weakness than she already had. Her legs screamed, her pride bled. Her hope, that fragile thing she'd tried so hard to protect, cracked clean through. But she did not cry. What Ruth Caldwell didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire exchange from the general store porch. Someone who'd seen Vernon Shaw's callous dismissal and Ruth's dignified refusal to break. Someone who'd witnessed the gossips circling like vultures and felt something stir in a chest that had been locked shut for 4 years. Cade Mercer had come to town that morning for supplies. Nothing special. Monthly run for feed nails roped the 1,000 small things a working ranch needed. His son Tommy had begged to come along the way 7-year-old boys do when they're bored and restless and hoping for adventure in town. They'd been loading the wagon behind the general store when the train arrived. Tommy had wanted to watch the way children find trains fascinating, so Cade had indulged him walking around to the front porch where they could see the platform. That's when he'd noticed the woman. Hard to miss her, really. Standing there alone while everyone else dispersed. The way she held herself straight-backed despite the cane, despite the obvious pain. The way she scanned the crowd with eyes that expected nothing good but hoped anyway. Cade knew that look. He'd worn it himself once. After Grace died. After the funeral, when people stopped bringing covered dishes and started avoiding his eyes. After he realized that sympathy had an expiration date, and after that you were on your own. He'd told himself it wasn't his business. This woman and whatever trouble brought her to Laramie wasn't his concern. He had enough problems. A ranch to run, a son to raise alone, a heart that still ached when he woke up reaching for someone who'd been dead 4 years. Then Vernon Shaw had arrived, and Cade had heard every word. Heard the dismissal in Vernon's voice when he called her crippled. Saw the money changing hands. Watched Ruth's face stay composed while her hands shook. "Pa," Tommy whispered, tugging at Cade's sleeve. "Why's that lady crying?" Cade looked at Ruth again. Her eyes were dry. "She's not crying, son." "Her hands are shaking, though." Tommy was observant for 7. Too observant sometimes. "Is she scared?" "Probably." "Why? How did you explain to a child that the world could be cruel, that people measured worth by appearances and found too many wanting, that a woman could travel across the country looking for a new start and have the door slammed in her face before she even got her bearings? She's in a difficult situation, Tommy. Can we help her?" Simple question, complicated answer. Cade's first instinct was no. Help meant involvement. Involvement meant caring. Caring meant vulnerability to loss. And Cade had promised himself, standing over Grace's grave while Tommy sobbed beside him, that he would never risk that kind of pain again. But then the 2 women in silk and superiority had walked by Ruth with those knowing smiles, and Cade felt something snap inside his chest, felt anger he hadn't felt in years, because he knew those women. Cornelia Ashworth and her niece Priscilla, society's self-appointed judges, the kind who measured righteousness by bank accounts and bloodlines. They'd circled after Grace's death too, bringing food and false sympathy, suggesting not so subtly that a man alone needed a wife, that Priscilla would make an excellent mother for Tommy, that certain alliances would benefit everyone. Cade had sent them away politely but firmly, told them he wasn't looking to remarry, wasn't interested. His refusal had been noted, remembered, held against him in small ways, invitations that stopped coming, conversations that ended when he approached, nothing dramatic, just the steady pressure of disapproval from people who thought their opinions mattered. Now those same women were judging this stranger on the platform, already condemning her, already spreading poison, and Cade found he couldn't walk away. "Stay here, Tommy." "But Pa—" "Stay. I'll be right back." Cade crossed the street, boots loud on the wooden boards, aware of eyes turning to follow. Small towns noticed everything. By supper, everyone would know Cade Mercer had approached the crippled woman Vernon Shaw rejected. Speculations would fly. Assumptions would form. Let them talk. He'd stopped caring what Laramie thought of him the day they tried to tell him how to grieve. Ruth saw him coming. Her body tensed like she expected another blow, Another rejection. Cade slowed his approach, kept his hands visible, his expression neutral, the same way he'd approach a spooked horse. Calm, unthreatening. "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat. The man looked to be in his late 30s, weathered by sun and work, but still strong. Basic courtesy his mother had drilled into him years ago. "Cade Mercer, I couldn't help but overhear your situation." Her chin came up. Gray eyes met his without flinching. "I don't need pity, Mr. Mercer." Good. She had spine. Not offering pity, offering work. That caught her off guard. Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching his face for the trap. "Work. My ranch needs a housekeeper, cook, someone to look after my son while I'm working cattle. Pays fair, room and board included." For a long moment she just stared at him. Cade could see her mind working behind those gray eyes, weighing options, assessing risks, looking for the angle. He understood. Woman alone learned to be suspicious, learned that generous offers usually came with hidden costs. "I won't be a charity case, Mr. Mercer." "I'm not offering charity. I need help. You need employment. It's business." "What happened to your previous housekeeper?" "Fair question. Haven't had one. Been making do on my own since my wife passed 4 years back. House shows it. Meals show it. My son deserves better than beans and biscuits every night." Something flickered in her expression. Understanding, maybe. "I can cook. I can clean. I can sew and mend. I can manage household accounts if needed. The injury," she gestured to her leg matter of fact, "it slows me down but doesn't stop me. I'm thorough, organized, reliable." She was selling herself, proving worth before he'd even questioned it. Cade wondered how many times she'd had to do this, how many doors had closed in her face before this one. "Terms," he said. $15 a month plus room and board, separate quarters in the main house, trial period of 1 month. If it doesn't work out, either party can end the arrangement with 2 weeks' notice. Fair. More than fair. Her voice was steady now, stronger. "I accept, Mr. Mercer. You won't regret it." Footsteps behind him, small, quick. Tommy had disobeyed the stay-put order. Of course he had. The boy appeared at Cade's elbow, staring up at Ruth with wide, serious brown eyes. Grace's eyes. Sometimes looking at Tommy hurt because the resemblance was so strong. "Is she gonna stay with us, Pa?" "For a while, maybe." Tommy turned his full attention to Ruth. "Can you cook Mrs. Porter's stew taste like mud?" Ruth's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I can cook. Do you like sugar cookies?" "Ma used to make sugar cookies on Sundays." Tommy's voice went quiet, careful, like he was testing whether this stranger could be trusted with his mother's memory. "I know a good recipe. Perhaps we could make some together." "Maybe." Non-committal. Tommy was learning to protect himself too. Cade put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Help me load Mrs. Caldwell's trunk." Between them they wrestled the trunk into the wagon bed. It was lighter than Cade expected. Whatever this woman had brought with her from back east, it wasn't much. Traveling light, or traveling with nothing to lose. Ruth climbed into the wagon seat with careful precision, using her cane for leverage, settling the carpet bag at her feet. Tommy scrambled into the back, kneeling behind the seat, still watching this stranger with 7-year-old wariness. Cade took the reins, clicked his tongue, and the horses moved forward, away from the platform, away from the gossips already spreading their poison, away from Vernon Shaw's rejection and toward something unknown. As they passed the general store, Cade saw Cornelia Ashworth standing in the window watching. Her face was unreadable, but he knew that look. Disapproval wrapped in false concern. She'd have something to say about this, about Cade bringing a strange woman to his ranch, about impropriety and scandal and what would people think. He didn't care. 6 miles stretched between Laramie and the Mercer Ranch, 6 miles of rolling prairie and distant mountains, November grass gone yellow and brown, sky so blue it hurt to look at, wind constant smelling of sage and coming snow. They rode in silence, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Ruth sat very still beside him, hands folded over her carpet bag, eyes scanning the landscape with careful attention. taking measure of this new world she'd entered, this last chance place. Tommy fidgeted in the back, bored with silence the way children get. "Pa, can I ride Chester when we get home?" "After chores." "But Pa—" "After." The boy subsided into sullen quiet. Cade felt a familiar pang of guilt. Tommy needed more than work and rules, needed laughter and play, needed someone who remembered what it was like to be 7 and restless and full of energy with nowhere to spend it. Grace would have known what to do. Grace had always known. She'd had this gift for making everything feel lighter, easier possible, like life was adventure instead of grinding struggle. Cade's hands tightened on the reins. 4 years, and some days it still felt like yesterday. Some days he could almost hear her voice, see her smile, feel her hand in his. Some days the absence was so sharp it cut. He pushed the thoughts away, locked them back in the sealed room in his chest where he kept everything that hurt too much to examine. Focused on the present, on the road ahead, on the woman beside him who'd just agreed to step into the space Grace had left. Not to replace her, that was impossible, but to fill the practical needs, the domestic void, the cooking and cleaning and basic human comfort of another adult presence in a house that had felt empty far too long. It was business, an arrangement, temporary solution to permanent problem. That's what Cade told himself as the ranch came into view over the last rise. The Mercer Ranch spread across 2,000 acres of prime Wyoming grassland. Cade's grandfather had claimed it back in the 40s, fought to keep it built, it into something real. Cade's father had expanded it, added cattle, made it profitable. Cade himself had inherited it at 20, married Grace at 22, and spent 16 years building it into one of the most successful operations in Laramie County. From the ridge, you could see the main house, large and solid, built to last. The barn, the stable, the bunkhouse where the hands slept. Corrals and outbuildings. Cattle scattered across pasture that stretched to the horizon. It looked good from a distance. Prosperous. Well-maintained. Successful. Up close the cracks showed. Cade saw it through Ruth's eyes as they approached. The house that needed paint. The porch that sagged slightly on the left corner. The windows that stared like blind eyes empty of curtains. The flower beds Grace had planted and tended now overgrown with weeds. 4 years of a man living alone. 4 years of function over form. 4 years of telling himself that what things looked like didn't matter as long as they worked. He felt a flash of shame seeing it fresh. This was what he was offering Ruth. This neglected place, this hollow shell of what used to be a home. But if she was judging, it didn't show on her face. She just studied the ranch with that same careful assessment she'd given the town, the road, everything. Taking measure, making calculations. Cade set the brake, climbed down, offered his hand to help her. She took it, her grip surprisingly strong, and lowered herself to the ground with slow precision. Tommy jumped down from the back, already running toward the barn, where Chester whinnied a greeting. "I'll get your trunk," Cade said. "Kitchen door's open. Go on in." Ruth hesitated, hand on her cane, looking at the house. Then she squared her shoulders and walked toward it, favoring her right leg, but moving steady. Determined. Cade watched her go, wondered what he'd just done. Wondered if this was the biggest mistake of his life or the smartest decision he'd made in 4 years. Inside the house was exactly what Ruth had braced herself for. The house of a man living alone. Clean enough, organized after a fashion, but utterly lacking warmth. The kitchen table held stacks of papers, receipts, correspondence. The sink was empty, but stained. The stove was cold. The air smelled stale, like windows that hadn't been opened in too long. No curtains. No flowers, no softness anywhere, just bare necessity and masculine indifference to comfort. Grace's presence was still there, though. Ruth could see it in the dishes arranged in the cupboard, in the way the pantry was organized, in small touches that spoke of a woman who'd cared about making a house into a home. But time and neglect had buried those touches under dust and disuse. Ruth set her carpetbag on a chair and stood in the center of the kitchen making mental lists. What needed doing? What needed replacing? What could be salvaged? The injured part of her leg throbbed from standing so long, but she ignored it. Pain was familiar. Pain she could work through. What mattered was this: a roof, a job, a chance. Footsteps on the porch. Cade came in with her trunk balanced on one shoulder like it weighed nothing. He set it down in the hall. "I'll show you to your room. It's upstairs, second door on the right. Tommy's room is next to it. Mine's downstairs off the kitchen." Separate quarters, he'd said. Proper arrangement. Ruth appreciated the clarity. No ambiguity. No room for misunderstanding or unwanted assumptions. She followed him up the narrow staircase, her cane loud on the wooden steps. At the top, a hallway stretched with 4 doors. 2 open, showing empty rooms. 1 closed, 1 ajar. Cade opened the second door. This was Grace's sewing room. There's a bed dresser chest. Linens are in the chest. Needs airing out, probably. Ruth stepped inside. Small room. Clean. Window facing east would get morning light. Simple furniture, but solid. Better than anything she'd expected. Better than what she deserved if she was honest. "It's perfect. Thank you." Cade nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Kitchen's stocked. Pantry's full. Cook what you want. Tommy and I usually eat around 6. Hands eat in the bunkhouse. You don't need to worry about them. I could cook for everyone. Feed the hands, too. That's more work." "I don't mind work, Mr. Mercer." He studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but maybe the beginning of respect. "Cade, no need for formality if you're living under my roof." "Then you should call me Ruth." "Ruth." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "I'll let you settle in. Come down when you're ready." After he left, Ruth stood in the middle of the room and allowed herself one moment of weakness. Sat on the bed, let her legs stretch out, closed her eyes against the burn of tears that wanted to fall. She was here. She'd made it. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, she had a place to be. Temporary, maybe. Contingent on proving herself, certainly. But real. Solid. More than she'd had this morning when she stepped off that train. The tears didn't fall. Ruth Caldwell had cried enough in her life. Had wept over James's betrayal, over the church's condemnation, over the accident that left her marked. Had shed enough tears to fill rivers. No more. From now on, she would earn her place. Prove her worth. Show Cade Mercer and his son and this whole town that Ruth Caldwell was more than her injury, more than her past, more than anyone's low expectations. She would make herself indispensable. She would make herself belong. And maybe if she was very lucky and very careful, she would finally find the one thing she'd been searching for since the day James walked out. A home. Ruth woke before dawn, her first morning at the Mercer Ranch. Old habit. In Boston, she'd risen early to prepare James's breakfast, to have the house ready before parishioners came calling to prove herself worthy of being a minister's wife. Even after he left, even after everything fell apart, the habit remained. Her body knew 5 in the morning the way some people knew their own names. She lay still for a moment in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of a house that wasn't hers. Floorboards creaking as someone moved downstairs. Cade, probably. The distant lowing of cattle. Wind rattling the window frame. The absolute silence that came from being miles from anywhere, from neighbors, from the noise and press of city life. Her leg ached. It always did in the morning, stiff and angry from a night of stillness. Ruth sat up slowly, worked the joint through its limited range of motion, felt the familiar burn that meant damaged tissue refusing to heal properly. 18 months and 3 doctors had all said the same thing. This was as good as it would get. Learn to live with it, or spend life waiting for a miracle that wouldn't come. Ruth had chosen to live with it. She dressed in the dim pre-dawn light, not bothering with a lamp. The same blue wool dress from yesterday, carefully mended at the elbows and hem. The same sturdy boots with the built-up right heel to compensate for her shortened gait. The same plain cotton undergarments washed so many times the fabric had gone soft and thin. Everything she owned was like this. Once good, now worn, but clean and serviceable. Presentable. That was the word. Ruth Caldwell might be poor and injured and alone, but she was presentable. Some pride couldn't be taken away. Downstairs, she found the kitchen empty, but the stove still warm. Someone had started a fire earlier, let it die back to coals. Ruth added wood, got the flames going properly, and set about exploring the space that would be her domain. The pantry was indeed well stocked. Flour, sugar, salt, lard, dried beans, rice, coffee, smoked ham hanging from a hook, strings of onions, root vegetables in bins, preserves on shelves, some with labels in a woman's careful handwriting. Grace's handwriting, Ruth realized. Grace's preserves. Some wives left behind children or land or money. Grace had left jam and pickled vegetables and the ghost of domesticity. Ruth selected what she needed: flour, baking powder, salt, lard, milk from the icebox. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, measuring by feel more than sight the way her Irish grandmother had taught her 30 years ago. Biscuits were simple, honest food, the kind that told you within one bite whether the cook knew what she was doing. While the oven heated, she started coffee. Strong. Cowboys liked it strong enough to float a horseshoe, her grandmother used to say. Ruth had never understood that expression until she'd served coffee to the men who'd worked James's church grounds. Working men wanted fuel, not delicacy. The biscuits went into the oven. Ruth set about making gravy, frying bacon, scrambling eggs. More food than 3 people needed, but she wanted abundance. Wanted to show capability. Wanted Cade and Tommy to come downstairs and see a table that said someone cared. Dawnlight was just touching the eastern windows when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, measured. Cade's boots. Then lighter, quicker steps. Tommy trying to sound like his father and not quite managing it. They appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. Both of them. Just stopped and stared. The table was set with mismatched plates Ruth had found in the cupboard. Coffee steaming in a chipped pot. Bacon piled on a platter. Eggs fluffy and golden. Gravy in a bowl. And in the center a basket lined with a clean towel filled with biscuits that were golden brown and perfect. Tommy's eyes went wide. "It smells like—" He stopped, glanced at his father uncertain. "Like before." Cade finished, his voice rough. "It smells like before." Ruth felt the tension in the words, the weight of memory. This was Grace's kitchen, Grace's domain, and here was Ruth, stranger and interloper, filling it with smells that brought back everything Cade had lost. "I hope that's all right," Ruth said carefully. "I wanted to demonstrate my capabilities as we discussed." Cade cleared his throat, looked away from the table. "You didn't have to. I said no expectations." "Yes, I did. We agreed on work. This is work." Tommy moved first, drawn by hunger and curiosity in equal measure. He climbed into a chair, reached for a biscuit, then paused and looked at his father for permission. Cade nodded. The boy split the biscuit open, watched steam rise, added butter that melted into the fluffy interior. He took a bite, chewed slowly. His expression did something complicated, surprise and memory and pleasure all tangled together. "Mrs. Caldwell, these are—" He struggled for words. "Good," Ruth offered. "Better than good. Better than—" He stopped again, loyalty to his mother's memory, warring with honesty about his taste buds. "Better than you've had in a while," Ruth finished for him. "That's all right. You can say it." Relief flooded Tommy's face. He took another bite, nodding enthusiastically. Cade sat down slowly, poured coffee, selected a biscuit with the care of a man diffusing a bomb. He broke it open, and Ruth saw something cross his face. Pain, maybe, or longing, or the terrible ache of remembering what used to be. He ate in silence. Both of them did. Ruth busied herself at the stove, pretending not to watch, giving them privacy with their complicated feelings. But she was watching, gauging reactions, reading the subtle shifts in Cade's expression that told her whether she'd crossed a line or found solid ground. When his plate was empty, Cade stood, carried it to the sink, paused there with his back to the room. His shoulders were tight, his hands gripping the counter edge. "It's good," he said finally. "Breakfast. It's real good. Thank you." "You're welcome. I've got to see to the stock. Tommy, you've got chores before you even think about riding Chester." "Yes, sir." They filed out, father and son, leaving Ruth alone in the kitchen with dirty dishes and the knowledge that she'd passed the first test. She'd proven she could cook. could fill bellies and maybe, just maybe, start filling the emptier spaces too. But she'd also seen the cost. Seen how much it hurt Cade to have his kitchen come alive again. Seen him remember and grieve and struggle with the fact that life continued even when you wished it wouldn't. Ruth washed the dishes slowly, her leg grateful for the excuse to shift weight from foot to foot. Through the window she could see Cade and Tommy heading toward the barn, the man's hand resting briefly on the boy's shoulder in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. They'd lost someone. She'd lost someone too, though in a different way. Maybe that was what drew Cade to offer her this chance. Recognition. The kind that came from knowing what it felt like to stand in ruins and try to build something from the wreckage. The morning passed in work. Ruth cleaned the kitchen, properly scrubbed surfaces that hadn't seen real attention in too long, organized cupboards, made lists of what needed replacing or mending. Her leg protested the activity, but she pushed through. Pain was familiar, pain she could ignore. Around noon she heard riders approaching, male voices, laughter. The ranch hands coming in from morning work, heading to the bunkhouse for their midday meal. Ruth made a decision, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, picked up the basket of leftover biscuits, and walked toward the bunkhouse with her careful, halting gait. 6 men sat around a rough table, passing tin plates and complaining about the coffee. They fell silent when she appeared in the doorway, stared at her the way men in groups stared at unexpected women, wary, curious, slightly hostile. "Gentlemen," Ruth said, keeping her voice level. "I'm Ruth Caldwell. I'll be keeping house for Mr. Mercer. I made extra biscuits this morning and thought you might appreciate them." She set the basket on the table and turned to leave. "Wait." The voice belonged to an older man, 50s or 60s, weathered face, shrewd eyes. He stood, removed his hat. "Jack Porter, ma'am. Foreman. These others are Pete Louise, Charlie William, and Joe." Nods all around. Uncertain but polite. Jack reached for a biscuit, examined it like he was checking for flaws. Took a bite. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Ma'am, these are—" "Damn. Sorry, excuse my language. These are the finest biscuits I've had in 10 years. The other men descended on the basket like locusts. Within seconds, every biscuit was claimed, consumed, praised. "You really keeping house for Cade?" Pete asked around a mouthful of bread and butter. "I am." "Good." This from Luis, a younger man with a Mexican accent and kind eyes. "Boss needs looking after. Been running himself ragged trying to do everything alone." "He's got help now," Ruth said simply. She left them arguing about whether they could convince her to cook for the bunkhouse too. Let them want her skills. Let them see her value. Let word spread that the crippled woman Vernon Shaw rejected could do something useful after all. Back at the house, Ruth started planning dinner, something substantial. Beef stew, maybe, with vegetables from the root cellar and fresh bread. Cowboys worked hard. They needed fuel. And Ruth needed them to go home tonight and tell their families that whatever Cornelia Ashworth was saying about the improper woman at the Mercer Ranch, at least she could cook. Saturday came, and with it the weekly trip to town. Cade had supplies to collect, orders to place. Tommy begged to come along, and Cade, in a moment of either weakness or wisdom, asked if Ruth wanted to join them. "I need to purchase a few personal items," Ruth said, "if it's not an imposition." "No imposition. Ready to leave in an hour." Ruth changed into her other dress. Dark green wool, even more worn than the blue, but clean and pressed. She pinned her hair with extra care, knowing she'd be on display. The crippled woman. The charity case. The subject of speculation and gossip. Let them look. Ruth had survived worse than small-town judgment. The ride into Laramie took the same 6 miles as before, but this time Ruth wasn't watching the landscape with desperate hope. This time she was watching with the eye of someone who lived here now, noting landmarks, memorizing the route, claiming this territory as her own. Tommy chattered in the back of the wagon, telling stories about Chester the horse and Bessie the milk cow and the new calf in the barn. 7 years old, and already he moved between comfortable silence and bursts of enthusiasm with the ease of a child who felt secure. At least when talking about animals. When talking about his mother, his voice changed, got quieter, more careful, like he was handling something fragile. The town square bustled with Saturday activity. Farmers selling late vegetables, women shopping with careful budgets, men congregating outside the saloon and general store trading news and lies in equal measure. Cade pulled up outside the general store. "I'll be about half an hour. Tommy, you stay with Mrs. Caldwell." "Yes, sir." They climbed down. Ruth accepted Cade's offered hand, hating that she needed the assistance, but grateful for the steadiness. Her leg was always worse after wagon rides, joints stiff from sitting still. Inside the general store, Ruth made her small purchases: thread needles, a bar of decent soap. Luxuries she could now afford with wages coming. The store owner, a thin man with nervous eyes, tallied her items with quick glances at her cane, her clothes, her face. "You're staying at the Mercer place?" "Not a question." "I am. Working as housekeeper." Non-committal. Judgment withheld but implied. Ruth paid, took her package, and turned to find Tommy examining penny candy with the intense focus of a child trying to make an impossible choice. "Pick one," Ruth said. "My treat." His eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" He selected a peppermint stick with careful deliberation. Ruth paid the extra penny, received the store owner's raised eyebrow as commentary, and guided Tommy outside. That's where they ran into Cornelia Ashworth. The woman stood near the wagon with two other ladies examining it with the kind of attention usually reserved for crime scenes. Her niece Priscilla stood beside her pretty face, arranged in an expression of concerned distress. "Mr. Mercer," Cornelia's voice carried across the square, pitched for maximum audience. "What were you thinking, bringing that woman into your home?" People stopped. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Small-town entertainment in real time. Cade's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Ashworth, good morning." Is it a good morning when decent folk have to witness such impropriety?" "I don't know what you mean." Cornelia's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "An unmarried woman living under your roof. Think of Tommy. Think of your poor Grace's memory." Ruth felt Tommy's hand slip into hers. The boy's palm was sweaty, nervous. He knew conflict when he heard it, even if he didn't understand all the implications. "Mrs. Caldwell is my employee." Cade said, his voice level, but with steel underneath. "Her employment is proper, and nobody's concern but mine." "Scandalous." This from one of the other ladies. "What must people think?" "I don't particularly care what people think." "Well, you should. You have a son to raise, a reputation to maintain. What kind of example does this set?" Ruth felt her spine straighten, felt anger rise hot and sharp. This woman with her expensive silk and her judgment, this woman who'd probably never worked a day in her life, never gone hungry, never had doors slammed in her face. This woman who thought respectability was something you bought with the right bloodline and the right bank account. She started to speak, to defend herself, to point out that earning her living was more respectable than living off a dead husband's money. But Cade spoke first. "The example it sets," he said clearly, voice cutting through the gathering crowd, "is that I judge people by their character and capabilities, not by gossip and prejudice. Mrs. Caldwell's employment is legal, proper, and beneficial to my household. Your opinion on the matter is noted and disregarded." Gasps rippled through the crowd. In small-town Wyoming, you didn't speak to Cornelia Ashworth like that. You didn't dismiss her publicly. You didn't choose the outsider over the establishment. Cornelia's face flushed red. "How dare you? I'm simply concerned about propriety, about Tommy's welfare, about what's right and decent." "Pa." Tommy's voice small but clear. "She's being mean to Mrs. Caldwell." The boy stepped forward, still holding Ruth's hand, looking up at Cornelia with his mother's serious eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell makes better biscuits than you, and she doesn't talk mean about people. Ma wouldn't like you talking mean." Silence. Complete, ringing silence. A 7-year-old boy had just told Laramie's social queen that she was being unkind, had invoked his dead mother's disapproval, had chosen the stranger over the establishment with a child's brutal honesty. Cornelia looked like she'd been slapped. Priscilla's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The gathered crowd shifted uncertain. Cade put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "We're done here. Come on." They climbed into the wagon, Ruth moving as quickly as her leg allowed, aware of every eye on her, aware of the whispers starting before they'd even pulled away, aware that she'd just become the center of the biggest scandal Laramie had seen in months. The ride home was quiet. Tommy sucked his peppermint stick in the back, pleased with himself. Cade's hands were tight on the reins, jaw clenched. "I'm sorry," Ruth said finally. "I've brought trouble to your door." "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble was already there. Cornelia's been trying to push Priscilla at me for 4 years, suggesting I need a proper wife, someone from a good family. She's not wrong about propriety. An unmarried woman living in your house will cause talk. Let them talk. I'm tired of living according to what other people think is proper." "But Tommy," the gossip could affect him. Cade glanced back at his son, who was obliviously enjoying his candy and watching cattle in the distance. "Tommy knows what matters. Character, kindness, doing right even when it's hard. That's what Grace taught him. That's what I'll keep teaching him." They pulled into the ranch yard. Tommy jumped down and ran toward the barn, shouting something about Chester. Cade helped Ruth down his hand, steadying her when her leg threatened to buckle. "Thank you," she said, "for defending me. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. Cornelia and her kind, they measure people by all the wrong things. Money, family name, who your parents were, like that matters more than who you are." His eyes met hers. "You've been here 3 days, and I already know you're worth more than half the so-called respectable women in that town." Ruth's throat went tight. When had anyone last said she had worth? When had anyone looked at her and seen value instead of liability? "I won't let you down," she said. "I know. Now get inside and rest that leg. You've been on it too much today." She wanted to protest, wanted to prove she didn't need coddling, didn't need special treatment. But the leg was screaming, and Cade's expression said he wouldn't take no for an answer. So Ruth went inside, climbed the stairs slowly, and lay down on her narrow bed with her leg elevated on a pillow. Through the window she could see Cade and Tommy working together in the corral, teaching the boy to handle a rope, patient and gentle. A family. Broken by loss but still functioning, still finding moments of connection. And Ruth, watching from her window, felt something dangerous unfold in her chest, felt herself starting to care, starting to invest, starting to imagine that maybe this place could be more than temporary employment. Starting to hope. She should have known better. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to heartbreak. But Ruth had never been good at protecting herself from impossible things. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of work and small victories. Ruth woke early, made breakfast, cleaned, mended, cooked dinners that brought praise from Cade and Tommy and the ranch hands who'd started finding excuses to visit the main house around mealtime. She organized Grace's old sewing supplies, planted herbs in pots on the sunny windowsill, despite it being November, and slowly transformed the house from functional to comfortable. She did it carefully, respectfully, adding her own touches without erasing Grace's memory. The photo on the mantel stayed in its place of honor. Ruth dusted it gently, met those frozen eyes with silent acknowledgement. "I'm not trying to replace you. I'm just trying to help what you left behind." Tommy warmed to her gradually. The first week he was polite but distant, testing, waiting to see if she'd leave like he probably expected everyone to leave eventually. The second week he started lingering in the kitchen while she cooked, asking questions about ingredients and techniques with 7-year-old logic. "Why do you put salt in cookies if they're supposed to be sweet? Salt makes the sweet taste sweeter, brings out the flavor. That doesn't make sense. Lots of things don't make sense until you try them." By the end of the second week, he was helping her make the Sunday sugar cookies, flour on his nose concentration fierce as he cut out shapes with an old tin cutter shaped like a star. Cade watched these moments from the doorway, sometimes expression unreadable. Ruth couldn't tell if he approved or if it hurt to see his son connecting with another woman. Probably both. Grief was complicated like that. Then came the night. Everything shifted. Wednesday evening, 2 weeks and 3 days after Ruth's arrival, one of the ranch hands came running to the house shouting for Cade. There'd been an accident. Pete had been kicked by a horse, bad injury to his ribs, maybe internal bleeding. Cade grabbed his coat. "I'll ride to town for Doc Harlan. Should be back in 2 hours." "Wait," Ruth's voice stopped him. "Let me look first." "You're not a doctor." "No, but I helped my husband with sick parishioners for 8 years. I know basic nursing. If it's not serious, we can save Doc Harlan a ride in the dark. If it is serious, I can stabilize him until you get back." Cade hesitated, then nodded. "Show me what you can do." They found Pete in the bunkhouse, writhing on his cot, face white, breathing shallow. The other hands stood around uselessly, men who could handle cattle and horses but had no idea what to do with human injury. Ruth knelt beside the cot, ignoring the protest from her own leg. "Pete, I need to examine your ribs. It's going to hurt. Can you stay still?" He nodded, teeth gritted. Ruth's hands moved with practiced efficiency, feeling for breaks, watching for signs of internal damage. She'd done this before too many times. Broken bones from fights, injuries from work, the constant stream of pain that came through a minister's door because people thought prayer fixed bodies as well as souls. 2 ribs cracked, she announced. Possibly a third, but no puncture. Breathing's compromised, but no blood in his mouth. No distended abdomen. I don't think there's internal bleeding." "You sure?" Cade asked. "As sure as I can be without being a doctor. But he needs those ribs bound, needs rest, and needs watching for the next 24 hours in case complications develop." "Can you do that?" Ruth met his eyes. This was another test, maybe the most important one. Yes. For the next hour she worked, bound Pete's ribs with strips of clean cotton, dosed him with willow bark tea for pain, elevated his head to ease breathing, gave instructions to the other hands about what to watch for what signs would mean emergency. Jack Porter watched the whole time, arms crossed, expression skeptical, turning to grudging approval. "Where'd you learn all this?" he asked when Pete was finally resting comfortably. "Boston. My husband's parish was in a poor neighborhood. People came to us when they couldn't afford doctors." "Your husband teach you?" "My husband mostly prayed. I did the practical work." Something shifted in Jack's weathered face. Respect, maybe. The kind that came from recognizing competence. "Well, ma'am, I'll admit I had doubts when Cade brought you here. City woman injured, figured you'd be more trouble than help. But I was wrong. You've got real skill, real value." Value. That word again. Ruth felt it settle into her bones like warmth. By the time she and Cade walked back to the main house, it was full dark, stars brilliant overhead, cold, sharp enough to burn. "Thank you," Cade said, "for handling that, for knowing what to do." "You're welcome." "Where'd you really learn it?" "The nursing." Ruth was quiet for a moment, weighing how much truth to share. "My husband wasn't a good man. He drank sometimes. Got rough when he drank. I learned to treat injuries because I had to treat my own." Cade stopped walking, turned to face her. In the darkness she could barely see his expression, but she felt his attention like a physical thing. "He hit you." Not a question, a statement heavy with anger. "Sometimes. When things weren't going well, when money was tight, when he was frustrated." Ruth kept her voice level. Facts without emotion. "I thought it was normal. Thought all wives dealt with it." "It's not normal. It's not right." "I know that now." They stood there in the cold darkness, 2 people who'd both learned hard lessons about marriage and loss and survival. "Is that why you left Boston?" Cade asked. "Part of it. The rest is complicated." "I've got time." So Ruth told him. Standing there in the dark where she couldn't see his face, judge her where the confession felt like releasing poison from a wound. Told him about James's drinking, his violence, his gradual slide into taking money from church funds. About the young woman from the choir, barely 20, pretty and naive. About coming home one day to find them both gone. The church accounts emptied a note saying James had found his true calling elsewhere. "The church blamed me," Ruth said. Said I must have failed as a wife if my husband sought comfort elsewhere. Said I should have noticed the missing money sooner, should have stopped it. They called me negligent at best, complicit at worst. That's horse shit. The vulgarity surprised a laugh out of her. Maybe, but their opinion mattered. They made sure I lost my position, made sure no respectable family would hire me, made sure everyone knew I was wife to a thief and probably a thief myself. And the accident. I was leaving a potential employer's house. They'd rejected me. I was upset not watching where I was going. Wagon came around the corner too fast. I jumped the wrong way, got clipped, broke my leg in 3 places. By the time it healed, it was like this, permanent. She'd never told anyone the whole story, never let the pieces fit together into one complete picture of failure and pain. But here in the darkness with Cade, it felt safe somehow, like confession to someone who understood. Vernon Shaw's advertisement said he wanted a capable wife, Ruth finished. I lied on my application, said I was widowed, healthy, respectable. All lies. When he saw the truth, he did what anyone sensible would do. Rejected damaged goods. Stop. Cade's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral of self-loathing. You're not damaged goods. You survived. You adapted. You kept going when easier options would have been to give up. That's not damage. That's strength. I lied to you too. On the platform I said I was widowed, but I don't know if James is dead or alive. For all I know, I'm still married to him. Are you? Legally, maybe. In every way that matters, no. He abandoned me, chose someone else. As far as I'm concerned, whatever tied me to him broke the day he left. Cade was quiet for a long moment. Does it matter to me, I mean, whether you're legally married to a man who's gone? Doesn't it? I'm working in your house, living under your roof. If I'm technically married, that makes things complicated. Only if we let it. Ruth, I don't give a damn about your legal status. I care that you're good to my son, that you work hard, that you're honest when it matters. The rest is just details. Relief flooded through her so intense it made her knees weak. She'd told him the worst parts, and he hadn't turned away, hadn't judged, hadn't reduced her to her failures. Thank you, she whispered. Nothing to thank me for, just being realistic. He paused. But Ruth, if James ever shows up here causing trouble, you tell me. I'll handle it. The protectiveness in his voice made something warm unfold in her chest. Dangerous, foolish, but there nonetheless. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence. Tommy was already asleep when Ruth checked on him, sprawled across his bed with the abandon of childhood. She pulled his blanket up, tucked it around his shoulders, and felt that dangerous warmth expand. This could be hers. This boy, this house, this life, if she was very careful and very lucky. But Ruth knew better than to count on luck. She'd learned that lesson in Boston, learned that hope was the thing that hurt worst when it died. So she went to her own room, lay down in her narrow bed, and told herself not to dream about impossible things. The consequences of that Saturday confrontation with Cornelia Ashworth came the following Sunday, Church Day. Ruth hadn't planned to attend, figured she'd stay home and avoid the judgment, but Cade asked if she wanted to come with them. Tommy and I go most weeks, not because I'm particularly godly, but because Grace thought it mattered, thought Tommy should grow up with community, with moral teaching. I keep the promise even though she's gone. I'll come, Ruth said. What else could she say? No, I'm afraid of your church ladies. No, I can't face the gossip. So she put on her best dress, the green wool, pinned her hair with care, and rode to town in the wagon with Cade and Tommy like they were a family, like she belonged. The church was a simple white building with a steeple that reached toward Wyoming sky. Modest, honest. Nothing like the grand stone cathedral where James had preached in Boston. People stared when they walked in. Of course they did. Cade Mercer with his new housekeeper. The scandal made flesh. Ruth kept her chin up her hand, light on her cane, her expression composed. They took a pew toward the back, Tommy between them fidgeting with his Sunday collar. The service started. Hymns, prayers, a sermon about loving your neighbor that felt pointed, given how many neighbors were actively not loving Ruth's presence. Then came the moment Ruth had been dreading. After the final hymn before dismissal, Cornelia Ashworth stood up. Pastor, if I might address the congregation. The young minister, uncertain, nodded. Cornelia turned to face the assembled crowd with the bearing of someone delivering important truth. Friends, I feel compelled to speak about a matter of grave concern. about propriety and morality and what we owe our children." Ruth's stomach dropped. She knew where this was going. "We have among us today a situation that troubles my conscience. An unmarried woman living in the home of a widowed man, sharing his roof, caring for his child, without benefit of marriage or proper chaperonage." Murmurs rippled through the congregation, some scandalized, some curious, some clearly thinking this was the most exciting thing to happen in church all year. "Now, I'm not suggesting any impropriety has occurred," Cornelia continued, voice dripping false charity. "But we must consider appearances. What message does this send to our young people that such arrangements are acceptable, that a woman can simply move into a man's home and call it employment?" "Mrs. Ashworth," Cade's voice cut through the murmuring. He stood face calm but eyes dangerous. "Unless you're planning to pay Mrs. Caldwell's wages yourself, her employment is none of your concern. I'm speaking of morality, Mr. Mercer, of what's right and proper. Then speak about the morality of judging others, of spreading gossip, of making assumptions about people you don't know." Cornelia's face flushed. "I'm simply protecting community standards." "No, you're protecting your own interests. You wanted me to marry your niece." I declined. "This isn't about morality, it's about wounded pride." Gasps now, open gasps. Cade had just called out the social queen in front of God and everyone. "How dare you suggest—" "Pa!" Tommy stood up on the pew, small but fierce. "Pa, she's being mean again." The boy turned to address the congregation, directly 7 years old and completely fearless. "Mrs. Ashworth is mean. Mrs. Caldwell is nice. She makes me cookies and helps with my reading and doesn't tell lies about people. Ma would have liked her. Ma would have said Mrs. Ashworth should mind her own business." Silence. Complete ringing silence. Then from the front row someone laughed. A woman's laugh, warm and approving. Rosa Martinez, the boarding house owner, stood up. "The boy speaks truth. I've known Cornelia Ashworth 20 years, and I've never seen her care about morality unless it served her purpose." Rosa's Spanish accent made the words somehow more powerful. "Mrs. Caldwell came to my house that first night, paid fare for her room, treated me with respect, didn't put on airs. I judge people by how they treat those with less power. Mrs. Caldwell passed that test. Mrs. Ashworth never has." Another woman stood, then another. 3, 4, 5 women rising to their feet in silent support. Not the wealthy ones, not the society ladies, the working women, the ones who knew what it meant to be judged by circumstances instead of character. Cornelia looked around clearly, not expecting this rebellion. "This is absurd. Pastor, surely you have something to say about proper moral behavior." The young minister looked deeply uncomfortable, caught between the woman who donated most generously to the church and his own conscience. Before he could speak, the church door opened. A man walked in, older official looking. Sheriff Wade Sterling. "Pardon the interruption, Pastor. Mrs. Ashworth, I need a word with you outside." Cornelia's face went white. "I'm in the middle of addressing my congregation." "It can't wait. It's about your property taxes. There seem to be some discrepancies." "I paid my taxes in full. That's what we need to discuss. Outside, now." It wasn't a request. Cornelia had no choice but to follow fury and fear warring on her face. The congregation erupted in whispers the moment she was gone. Ruth sat very still, hand gripping her cane, trying to process what had just happened. She'd been defended, publicly, by Cade, by Tommy, by women she barely knew, by a child's honest voice and working women's solidarity. The service ended in chaos and confusion. People filed out in small groups, talking urgently. Ruth stood slowly, her leg complaining after sitting so long. Outside, Sheriff Sterling was speaking quietly with Cornelia, showing her papers. Even from a distance, Ruth could see the woman's face crumpling. Whatever those papers said, it wasn't good news. "What's happening?" Ruth asked. "Don't know," Cade said. "But Sterling's honest. If he says there's a problem with Cornelia's taxes, there probably is." They drove home in thoughtful silence. Tommy chattering about how Mrs. Martinez made the best tamales and could he have some sometime. Cade's jaw working like he was thinking hard about something. At the ranch, while Tommy ran off to play and Cade headed to the barn, Ruth started preparing Sunday dinner. Roast beef, potatoes, vegetables. The kind of meal that took time and care. She was peeling potatoes when Cade came back, hat in hands, expression serious. "We need to talk," he said. Ruth's stomach clenched. Here it was, the dismissal, the thanks, but this isn't working out, the inevitable rejection. "All right." Cade sat at the kitchen table, turned his hat in his hands, clearly struggling with words. "This morning at church, what Cornelia said about impropriety, she's not wrong about how it looks. I know. I don't care what it looks like, but I do care about protecting you from gossip, about making sure your reputation isn't damaged by working here. My reputation was already damaged before I arrived, Cade. I'm not sure it can get much worse. Still, there's a way to make this situation more acceptable, more permanent." Ruth's hands stilled on the potato. "What do you mean?" "I mean marriage, real marriage, legal and proper." The potato dropped into the bowl. Ruth stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You want to marry me. I want to make your position here secure. Want to give Tommy the mother figure he's already starting to bond with. Want to thumb my nose at Cornelia Ashworth and everyone else who thinks they can dictate how I live my life. Those are reasons to make a business arrangement, not reasons to marry." Cade met her eyes. "You're right. So here's the real reason. I like having you here, like coming home to a house that feels lived in, like watching Tommy smile again, like knowing there's someone who understands what it means to survive loss and keep going anyway." "That's still not love." "No, it's not love. It's honesty and respect and partnership. It's choosing to build something with someone who won't judge you for your scars because she has her own." Ruth's hands were shaking. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're capable and kind. I know you work hard and don't complain. I know Tommy trusts you, and that boy doesn't trust easy. I know you faced down Cornelia Ashworth without flinching. Cade, this is practical. I know. Everything about this is practical. But practical isn't bad. Some of the best partnerships are built on mutual benefit and honest assessment." Ruth thought about Boston, about James who'd promised love and given betrayal, about romance that had curdled into violence and abandonment, about every pretty lie she'd believed because she wanted to believe in fairy tales. Cade was offering something different. No grand declarations, no promises of forever, just honest partnership between two survivors who understood that sometimes surviving was enough. "What about Grace?" Ruth asked. "What about the wife you loved and lost?" Pain flickered across Cade's face. "Grace will always be part of me. Her memory, her impact, the years we had. I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to be something different. My partner, my co-parent, my friend. And if someday you want more, want someone you can love the way you loved her, then we'll face that if it comes. But right now, Ruth, I'm offering you security, stability, and respect. Legal protection, a home, a family. Isn't that worth something?" It was worth everything. It was more than Ruth had hoped for in her darkest moments, more than she deserved. But it was also terrifying, because accepting meant staying, meant investing, meant risking the heartbreak of building something only to lose it. "I need time to think," she said. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." That night, Ruth lay awake, staring at the ceiling, weighing impossible choices. Marriage to a man who respected her, but didn't love her. Security bought with emotional distance. A child who needed her, but wasn't hers. Practical. Sensible. Everything her Boston dreams of romance hadn't been. Maybe practical was better. Maybe practical lasted. By morning, she'd made her decision. She found Cade in the barn, checking on a mare heavy with foal. He looked up when she entered, question in his eyes. "Yes," Ruth said. "I'll marry you, on 2 conditions." "Name them." "First, this stays a partnership. Equal say in decisions about the ranch, about Tommy, about our lives. I won't be a decorative wife who defers to her husband." "Agreed." "Second, If either of us wants to end this, we can. No shame, no blame. Just honest acknowledgement that it's not working. Cade extended his hand. Deal. Ruth shook it, feeling calluses on his palm that matched her own. A working handshake. A partnership agreement sealed the same way business deals were sealed. Not romantic, but real. And sometimes real was better than romantic anyway. They married on a Tuesday morning in Doc Harlan's front parlor. No fanfare, no guests beyond the witnesses required by law. Just Cade and Ruth standing before the elderly doctor who doubled as justice of the peace when the circuit judge wasn't in town, exchanging vows that sounded more like business contracts than promises of devotion. Do you, Cade Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Ruth Caldwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Ruth's voice didn't shake. Her hands clasped around a small bouquet of dried wildflowers Rosa Martinez had pressed into her palm that morning, stayed steady. This was practical, sensible, a legal arrangement that protected them both. So why did her heart hammer like she was making the most reckless decision of her life? By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Doc Harlan smiled warm and genuine. You may kiss the bride, Cade. Cade looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at Cade. The moment stretched awkward and uncertain between them. This wasn't a love match. This was business. Kissing felt like crossing a line neither had agreed to. Then Cade leaned in, brushed his lips against her cheek. Brief, chaste, the kind of kiss you'd give a sister or a friend. Congratulations, Doc Harlan said, handing Cade the marriage certificate. You're doing the right thing, you know. That boy needs stability, and Ruth here needs protection from the vultures. They filed the certificate at the territorial office within the hour, made it legal, made it real, made Ruth into Mrs. Mercer with all the rights and protections that came with the name. On the ride back to the ranch, Tommy chattered excitedly about whether this meant Ruth was his mother now, whether he could call her Ma, whether they'd have a party. You can call her whatever feels right, Cade said. And no party. This is between us. But Pa people have parties when they get married. Some people do. We're not some people. Tommy subsided into thoughtful quiet. Ruth reached back, squeezed his hand. The boy squeezed back, and something in Ruth's chest both warmed and ached. This was hers now. This child. This man. This life. At least until one of them decided otherwise. Back at the ranch, life continued with strange normalcy. Ruth cooked. Cade worked. Tommy went to school 3 days a week and helped with chores the other 4. On the surface, nothing changed except the name on legal documents, but underneath everything was different. Ruth slept in her own room still. Cade never suggested otherwise. Their marriage was legal but not consummated, a detail neither discussed but both understood. This was partnership, not romance. Respect, not passion. Except sometimes Ruth caught Cade watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, and sometimes when their hands brushed passing dishes at dinner, she felt something electric that had nothing to do with practicality. She told herself it was imagination, told herself not to read meaning into moments that meant nothing. But her heart wasn't listening. 2 weeks after the wedding trouble arrived in an expensive suit and cold eyes. His name was Howard Blackwood, and he introduced himself as a land agent working for the territorial government. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. He came on a Wednesday afternoon when Cade was checking fence lines in the north pasture. Ruth answered the door, immediately wary of strangers bearing official documents. Mrs. Mercer. Blackwood's smile was practiced, professional. I'm looking for your husband. Matter of some importance regarding his property. He's working. Can I help you? I really should speak with Mr. Mercer directly. It concerns his land title. Ice slid down Ruth's spine. Is there a problem? Potentially, but I'd prefer to discuss it with the property owner. He was already dismissing her, already treating her like decoration instead of co-owner. Ruth felt anger rise familiar and sharp. I'm co-owner of this property as of 2 weeks ago. Whatever you need to say to my husband, you can say to me." Blackwood's smile thinned. "Very well. There's been an irregularity discovered in the original land grant. The previous owner, Mr. Mercer's father, apparently had outstanding debts when he sold the property to his son, debts that created a lien on the land." "That's impossible. Cade bought this property legal. He has the deed." "I'm sure he does, but deeds can be invalidated if prior claims exist, and according to records I've discovered, there was a substantial loan taken out against this property in 1876, months before the sale to Mr. Mercer." "You're saying Cade's ownership is invalid." "I'm saying it's disputed. Until the matter is resolved, all transactions involving this property are frozen, including any recent marriage settlements or property transfers." He was looking at her when he said it, making sure she understood. Her marriage, her new status, her claim to protection through Cade's name and property, all of it potentially worthless if he could prove his case. "What do you want?" Ruth asked bluntly. "Want I'm simply an agent of the government, Mrs. Mercer. I want what's fair and legal." "What do you really want?" Blackwood's smile disappeared entirely. "I want to resolve this matter with minimum disruption. If Mr. Mercer were willing to sell the property to an interested buyer at a fair price, the irregularity in the title could be overlooked." "How much?" 50 cents an acre. Ruth didn't know much about Wyoming land values, but she knew theft when she heard it. "This land is worth $5 an acre minimum. You're offering a tenth of fair value." "I'm offering a solution to a complicated legal problem. Without it, Mr. Mercer faces years of litigation and potential loss of everything. Get off our property." "Mrs. Mercer, I strongly suggest—" "Now." Blackwood studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "I'll return when your husband is available, someone with more sense than pride." He rode away, leaving Ruth shaking with anger and fear in equal measure. This was no bureaucratic error. This was a scheme, a land grab. Someone wanted Cade's property badly enough to fabricate documents and use the law as a weapon. When Cade returned that evening, she told him everything, watched his face go hard and cold as she repeated Blackwood's words. "He's lying," Cade said flatly. "My father never took loans, paid cash for everything. I have all his papers, all the records. There's no outstanding debt." "Can you prove it?" "I can prove what I have. Can't prove what doesn't exist." "Then how do we fight this?" Cade was quiet for a long moment, staring at nothing. "We lawyer up. We document everything. We prepare for a long fight." "And if we lose?" "We won't." But his voice lacked conviction. They both knew that having the truth on your side didn't always matter when the other side had power and money and willingness to lie. That night Ruth lay awake listening to the house settle around her, thinking about what losing would mean. For Cade, for Tommy, for the fragile security she'd just started to believe in. She was so focused on worry that she almost missed the smell. Smoke. Ruth sat up instantly alert. Not chimney smoke, not normal fire smell. This was different, urgent. She grabbed her robe, rushed to the window. Orange light flickered from the direction of the barn. Fire. Ruth ran downstairs shouting, "Cade, fire! The barn's on fire!" He was already moving, must have smelled it too. Boots on coat grabbed out the door before she finished speaking. Tommy appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide and frightened. "What's happening?" "Stay inside. Don't come out no matter what." But Ruth couldn't stay inside. Not when Cade and the hands were fighting flames that lit the night sky orange and terrible. Not when livestock screamed in panic and men shouted orders and chaos reigned. She limped to the barn as fast as her damaged leg allowed. The scene was nightmare made real. Flames engulfed the hayloft, spreading fast, horses wild with fear, cattle lowing in distress, men running with buckets with blankets with desperate hope. Ruth joined the bucket brigade from the well. Her leg screamed protest, but she ignored it, passed water until her arms shook. Watched Cade and Jack Porter lead terrified horses from burning stalls, saw the structure that had stood for 30 years collapse in on itself with a roar of heat and destruction. By dawn it was over. The barn was a total loss. Blackened timbers, ash, destruction that would cost hundreds to rebuild. But no lives lost, no livestock dead, just property damage and the sick certainty that this was no accident. Jack found the evidence as the sun rose, a can of kerosene deliberately placed, boot prints in the soft earth that didn't match any ranch hand, signs of arson so clear even the blind could see them. "Someone wanted to send a message," Jack said, his weathered face grim. Ruth looked at Cade, saw him thinking the same thing she was. Blackwood. This was Blackwood's message. Sell or face worse. "I'll go to Sheriff Sterling," Cade said. "This is criminal. This is attempted murder." But Ruth knew standing there in the smoking ruins of what had been that reporting crimes didn't always mean justice. Not when the criminal had money and connections and the law on his side. She also knew something else with terrible clarity. She was the reason this was happening. Blackwood had mentioned the marriage settlement, had made sure she understood that her presence, her claim to Cade's property, was complicating his plans. If she left, maybe Blackwood would back off. Maybe Cade could fight the legal battle without the added complication of a wife he'd married out of duty. That night, while Cade met with Sterling in town, Ruth packed her bag. Not everything, just enough. The blue dress, the green dress, her few personal items, the money she'd saved from her wages before the marriage. Not much, but enough to get somewhere. Anywhere. She was standing by the door, carpet bag in hand, when Cade came home just after midnight. He saw her, saw the bag. His face went very still. "You're leaving." "I have to. They're hurting you because of me. They're hurting me because I'm in their way. You being here is excuse, not reason. Tommy could have died in that fire. I can't be responsible." "Tommy's already lost one mother." Cade's voice was rough. "You leave, he loses another. Better I leave now than stay and bring more destruction. Is that what you think? That you're the problem?" "I know I am. Blackwood made that clear. The marriage complicates his scheme. If I'm gone, if you're gone, he wins. He proves that he can drive people away, break families, destroy what we're building. We're not building anything real. This marriage is a contract, a convenience." "Is that what you think?" Cade moved closer. "That this is just convenience? You said it yourself. Partnership, mutual benefit, practical arrangement." "I said that because I was afraid to say the truth, because I swore when Grace died that I'd never care about anyone that much again, never risk that kind of loss." His voice cracked. Ruth had never heard it crack before. "But you came here, and everything I promised myself, every wall I built, you just walked right through them without even trying. You made my house feel like home. You made my son smile. You made me remember what it's like to want something beyond just surviving the day." "Cade, I'm not brave enough to say I love you. Not yet. But I'm brave enough to say I don't want you to leave. That the thought of you gone makes me feel like I'm losing something I didn't know I still had the capacity to lose." Ruth's hands trembled on her bag. "This will get worse before it gets better. Blackwood won't stop. And I have secrets, Cade. Things I haven't told you. Things that could destroy everything." "Then tell me. Whatever it is, we face it together." So Ruth told him. About James. About the truth she'd hidden behind the word widowed. "I'm not a widow. James didn't die. He left me. Ran off with church money and another woman. For all I know, he's alive somewhere. For all I know, our marriage might not even be legal because I might still be married to him." Cade was quiet for a long moment. "Do you love him still?" "No. I hate him for what he did." "Then I don't care about the rest. Legally married or not, you're my wife now. The woman who shares my home, the mother to my son, the partner I chose. Some preacher's words on paper don't change that. What if he comes back? What if he causes trouble? Then we'll handle it, together." Ruth set down her bag, stepped forward, let Cade pull her into his arms, solid and warm and real. "I'm afraid," she whispered against his chest. "Me too, but I'm more afraid of living without you." They stood like that in the dark hallway while the clock struck 1 and the house creaked around them. Two damaged people choosing each other despite every logical reason not to. Ruth didn't go back to her room that night. Cade led her to the master bedroom he'd slept in alone for 4 years, made love to her with gentle reverence like she was something precious instead of broken. Afterward, lying in his arms, Ruth felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long, finally opening. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said. "I know I'm falling in love with you." Cade's arms tightened around her. "I think I started the day you stepped off that train and refused to cry." They slept tangled together, and for the first time since James left, Ruth felt safe. Morning shattered the peace. A rider came fast, horse-lathered. Message for Cade Mercer. Urgent. From Sheriff Sterling. Cade read it, his face draining of color. "James Caldwell arrived in Laramie last night. Claims his wife is here illegally. Says I'm harboring a fugitive." Ruth's worst fear made real. How did he find me? Cornelia. Has to be. She must have written to Boston, made inquiries. Led him right here. Within the hour, James arrived at the ranch. Still handsome, still charming, still the man who'd promised Ruth the world and given her nothing but pain. Sheriff Sterling rode with him, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Cade, but if Mrs. Caldwell is legally married to this man—" "I am her husband," James said smoothly. "Have been for 9 years. Ruth has been unwell, unstable since a tragic accident. She disappeared from Boston, and I've been searching for her ever since." "That's a lie." Ruth's voice was steady despite the terror flooding her veins. "You abandoned me, stole from the church, ran off with another woman." "See?" James turned to Sterling with practiced sympathy. "The delusions continue. Sheriff, I need to take my wife back east for proper medical treatment." "She's not going anywhere with you." Cade stepped between them. "She's my legal wife. You have no claim." "I have her. That's all the claim I need." Sterling held up his hands. "Let's all calm down. Mr. Caldwell, you have proof of marriage." James produced a certificate. Official legal bearing, Ruth's maiden name, and the date from 9 years ago. "And you, Cade, when did you marry Mrs. Caldwell?" 2 weeks ago." "Then I'm afraid the first marriage takes precedence, unless it was legally dissolved." "It was never legal in the first place." Doc Harlan's voice rang from the porch. The old doctor walked forward, papers in hand. "I did some checking when Cade told me his suspicions. Sent telegrams to Boston. Turns out our Mr. Caldwell here had a prior marriage, one that was never dissolved when he married Ruth." James's face went white. "Marriage to one Constance Miller in 1872 Philadelphia. Still legally binding when he married Ruth in 1874. Doc Harlan handed the papers to Sterling. "Which makes his marriage to Ruth invalid. Bigamy, I believe they call it." Sterling read the document's, expression hardening. "Mr. Caldwell, you want to explain this." That was a mistake, youthful foolishness. Constance and I separated years before. But never divorced, making you a bigamist, making Ruth free to marry whoever she chooses." Doc Harlan looked at Ruth. "You were never legally married to him, my dear, which means your marriage to Cade is perfectly valid." Relief flooded through Ruth so intense she swayed. Cade's hand steadied her. James saw his advantage crumbling. Tried a different tack. "The church money. Ruth was complicit. She helped me plan—" "That's another lie." Rosa Martinez stepped forward. Ruth hadn't even seen her arrive. "I have letters from Boston, from women in James's former congregation. They testify that Ruth reported the missing money, that she tried to stop him, that the church board blamed her to cover their own negligence. And I have a warrant for your arrest." Sterling pulled out handcuffs. "Embezzlement, fraud, bigamy. You've got quite a list, Mr. Caldwell." James tried to run, made it 3 steps before Jack Porter's rope caught him around the chest, dropped him hard. The old foreman grinned. "Been wanting to rope me a snake." As Sterling hauled James away, still protesting, still lying, Ruth felt something break loose inside her. The fear she'd carried for 18 months. The shame. The certainty that she was somehow to blame for everything that had gone wrong. James had done this, not her. James was the criminal, the liar, the one who'd destroyed lives and run from consequences, and now justice was catching up. But the relief was short-lived, because that afternoon Blackwood returned with armed men and an eviction notice. "Mr. Mercer, this property is hereby seized pending resolution of title dispute. You have 24 hours to vacate." "That's illegal. You can't evict without a court order." "I have a court order." Blackwood showed papers with a judge's signature. Kate examined them, face going tight. "Judge Hawthorne didn't sign this. He's in Denver this week." "You calling me a forger?" "I'm calling you a liar and a criminal." Blackwood smiled. Strong words from a man about to lose everything. "Boys, start removing Mr. Mercer's property." The armed men advanced. Cade's hands went to his rifle. Jack and the other ranch hands formed a line. Ruth saw it about to turn violent, saw men about to die over land and lies. "Wait," she stepped forward. "Where's Tommy?" Cade's face drained of blood. He'd sent the boy to Doc Harlan's that morning for safety. But Doc's place was 2 miles away, and a rider approached fast. Not Tommy. One of Blackwood's men, looking nervous. "Boss, we've got a problem. That federal marshal you were worried about, he just rode into town asking questions." Blackwood's confidence cracked. "What marshal?" "The one investigating land fraud across the territory. Heard he's already arrested 3 agents. Says he's got evidence of a scheme involving forged documents and stolen property." The color drained from Blackwood's face. He looked at his hired guns at Cade and the hands at the ranch he'd tried to steal. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yeah, it is." Sheriff Sterling rode up with 2 deputies and a man wearing a federal marshal's badge. "Howard Blackwood, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft." What followed was chaos. Blackwood trying to run, his men abandoning him, deputies wrestling him into handcuffs while he shouted about his rights and his connections and how this was all a misunderstanding. The federal marshal, a weathered man named Carson, explained it to Cade and Ruth while Blackwood was hauled away. "We've been tracking a land fraud ring for 6 months. Blackwood's been forging documents, bribing officials, stealing property across 3 territories. You're the 7th case we've documented, but you're the first one who fought back hard enough to draw attention." "What happens now?" Ruth asked. "Now we recover the properties, prosecute the criminals, and restore legitimate ownership. Your title is clear, Mr. Mercer. Always was. Blackwood just tried to make you think otherwise." After they left, after the dust settled and the danger passed, Cade pulled Ruth close. "It's really over. All of it." "Not quite." Ruth took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "There's one more thing you should know." She watched realization dawn on his face, watched shock become wonder, become joy. "You're pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think. Doc Harlan confirmed it this morning." Cade's eyes went wet. He dropped to his knees, pressed his forehead against her stomach. "A baby. We're having a baby." "Are you happy?" "Terrified. Overwhelmed. Happier than I thought I had any right to be." Tommy's voice rang from the house. "Pa-ma, I'm home." The boy came running, launched himself at them both. They caught him, held him, became a knot of arms and laughter and tears. This was family, messy and complicated and built from broken pieces, but real, theirs. 1 year later, Ruth stood on the porch holding baby Grace Ruth Mercer, watching Cade teach Tommy to rope. The boy was 8 now, serious and focused, determined to be just like his father. The ranch had prospered. New barn rebuilt better than the old one. Herd expanded. New hands hired. Everything Grace had built and Cade had maintained, now growing under their combined vision. In town, Cornelia Ashworth's house stood empty. She'd left in disgrace after her connection to James became public knowledge. Priscilla had married a merchant from Denver, glad to escape the scandal. Ruth had started a school teaching 15 students in the church basement 3 days a week. Not charity work. Paid position. Respectable employment for a rancher's wife who believed education mattered. Doc Harlan visited weekly, ostensibly to check on baby Grace, but really to play chess with Cade and drink Ruth's good coffee. Life had become almost ordinary, almost normal, except nothing about it felt ordinary to Ruth. Not after everything she'd survived to get here. 5 years later, the Mercer Ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres. Tommy, now 12, worked alongside his father with the competence of someone twice his age. Grace Ruth, 5 years old, tagged after them both, chattering constantly about horses and cattle, and why couldn't she have her own rope? Daniel, the baby boy, born 2 years after Grace, tottered after his siblings with determination that exceeded his coordination. Ruth watched them all from the kitchen window, hands deep in bread dough, her injured leg still aching on cold mornings, but no longer defining her. Jack Porter had retired to a small cabin on the property, spending his days teaching Tommy everything he knew about ranching and life. Sheriff Sterling stopped by monthly, part friend and part reminder that justice, while slow, eventually arrived. And Cade, her husband, in every way that mattered, still looked at her sometimes like he couldn't quite believe she was real. On their 5th anniversary, they rode up to the ridge overlooking the ranch, spread a blanket, watched their children play in the distance while the sun set over Wyoming mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Ruth asked, taking a chance on a crippled woman with nothing to offer. "Every day." Cade's voice was solemn. Ruth's heart dropped. Then he smiled. "I regret not meeting you sooner, not having more years, not starting this life back when we were both young and whole. We were never whole. No, but together we're something better than whole. We're real." Ruth leaned against him, felt his arm come around her shoulders. "I love you. I love you too, even though you still make better biscuits than I do." She laughed. After everything, after all the pain and fear and struggle, she could still laugh. Tommy called from below, waving. Grace Ruth had caught a frog and wanted to show them. Daniel had fallen in mud and needed cleaning. Normal problems, family problems, the kind Ruth had once thought she'd never have. "Come on," Cade said, standing and offering his hand. "Our kingdom needs us." Ruth took his hand, let him pull her up, favored her bad leg out of habit, but felt no shame in it. They walked down the ridge together toward the noise and chaos and beautiful mess of the life they'd built. Years later, long after Ruth and Cade had passed, long after Tommy had taken over the ranch and passed it to his own children, long after the struggles and triumphs had faded into family legend, the Mercer Ranch still stood, still family-owned, still run on the principles Ruth and Cade had established. Hard work, fair dealing, judging people by character instead of circumstance. In the main house, updated but recognizable, a photo hung on the wall. Ruth and Cade on their wedding day, solemn-faced and uncertain, not knowing yet what they would become. Beside it, another photo. The whole family 5 years later. Tommy grinning, Grace Ruth missing her front teeth, Daniel in Ruth's arms, Cade's hand on Ruth's shoulder. All of them looking at the camera like they were daring it to doubt that they belonged together. The current generation of Mercers, great-great-grandchildren who'd never met Ruth and Cade, still told the story. About the mail-order bride who arrived with a bad leg and a worse reputation. About the rancher who saw past both to the woman underneath. About how worth isn't measured in dollars or social standing or physical perfection. Worth is measured in character, in courage, in the choice to keep going when quitting would be easier. Ruth Caldwell arrived in Wyoming Territory with $1.47 a damaged leg and no prospects. She left behind when she finally passed at age 73, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy that lasted generations. Not of land, though the ranch still stood. Not of money, though prosperity had come. But of proof that worth once earned through honest living and fearless love never fades. The story of the widow who wasn't a widow and the rancher who learned to love again became the foundation myth of the Mercer family, told and retold, embellished and simplified, but always ending the same way, with two broken people who chose each other, who built something lasting from their ruins, who proved that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose and fight for and earn through sheer stubborn determination. 148 years after Ruth stepped off that train in Laramie, the Mercer Ranch still operates, still raises cattle on Wyoming grassland, still passes from parent to child with the same values Ruth and Cade established. And in the family cemetery on the East Ridge, 2 headstones stand side by side. Cade Mercer, loving husband, devoted father, honest man. Ruth Caldwell Mercer, worth more than gold. The end of one story. The beginning of a legacy that proved what Ruth had always known but needed time to believe. That worth isn't given by others. It's proven through action, through choice, through refusing to let circumstances define you. And that sometimes when you think you have nothing left to offer, you discover you've been carrying everything that matters all along.